Hi, my name is Thomas Hyman and welcome to today's training session. Today I want to talk about contracts. There's a lot of confusion amongst agents between should I use the standard 4-bar contract or should I use an as-is contract, and what about all the addendums that are required or available to use with these contracts. So to give those of you who are new agents a little bit of a foundation, and even if you're experienced, just to give you a different perspective maybe when looking at these contracts, I'm going to go ahead and spend a little time to go through both the as-is contract as well as the traditional sale and purchase contract, so you can see the differences between the two of them and make a much better determination which one is better suited for your customer or for your client. And if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email, follow me and contact me on Twitter, or just give me a call or send me a text message. I would love to talk to you and get your feedback. Even if you're not part of our company, I think this still will be of great value to you. So without any further ado, let me go into our Google Drive, where I have prepared a number of different contracts to look at. And the first one that we're going to look at is the as-is contract, which is very, very popular nowadays. I'm going to really blow this up so you can see that. And in this day and age, short sales are the new normal. REOs are very, very popular, especially with investors. So I can tell you from my own experience as both a real estate broker and a title agent that a huge percentage of contracts are written using the as-is contract today. So I want to go through it and just point out some things to you, and then later when we look at the traditional contract, you can see the differences between the two. A couple of misconceptions to push out the way. Just because you use an as-is contract, it does not alleviate you from having to produce certain disclosures. For example, a homeowners association disclosure, if that is not provided and there is an association, the buyer could cancel. A condominium association disclosure and the condominium documents, the right of rescission, those things are not impacted by the as-is contract. Also, the fact that the seller has to disclose any material known facts is not going to be alleviated by an as-is contract. So if you have a seller that knows that there's a hidden defect and they're not going to disclose it, and they try to lean onto, well, this was an as-is contract and we bought it as is, could still be very, very problematic. So the first thing I would suggest, especially if you're representing a buyer, is that you're going to request a seller's property disclosure. Even if the seller never lived in a property and has no knowledge about it, ask them for a blank one, or take one and just cross through seller has no knowledge. But you want to have a seller property disclosure, because that really is the key document that the seller uses to disclose known material facts. All right, the standard components of the contract, the parties, the seller, buyer, none of that is really changing between an as-is contract and a traditional contract. And just to simplify it or make it a little bit more simplistic, the main difference between an as-is contract and a traditional contract, on the surface, there are some other differences that I want to point out, but the main difference is that on an as-is contract, the seller is not obligated to make any kind of repairs. So with an as-is contract, if there is termite damage or if there are damages to warranted items, roof, windows, structural, and so forth, the seller is under no obligation to make those repairs to bring those items back into workable condition. And the buyer has the ability to make an inspection, and on the flip side, the buyer can walk if the buyer does not like the results of the inspection. Whereas with a traditional contract, the seller agrees to make repairs up to a certain amount. The buyer does their inspections, and the buyer does not have the right to walk if they don't like the inspection results, so long that the seller, corrects any warranted items and makes those repairs. So for instance, with an as-is contract, you put a property under contract that turns out has a huge roof leak. The seller is under no obligation to repair that roof, and the buyer, after they do their inspection, find out that there's a huge roof leak, can just decide to terminate the contract, in accordance with the terms of the contract, but the buyer can cancel and walk away. On the other hand, with a traditional sale and purchase agreement, the buyer does the inspections and finds a huge roof leak, and now the buyer puts a request to the seller, hey seller, you need to make these repairs, there's a leak in the roof. And then the seller can either make those repairs, or the seller can say, well, to make the repairs is $10,000, but the repair allowance is only $7,500, so I'm willing to pay up to $7,500, and or maybe we can meet somewhere in the middle, and as long as the repairs are within the repair limit set on the contract, the seller would have to make those repairs. If the repairs exceed the repair limit on the contract, then the seller does not have to make the repairs, and the parties could cancel the contract. So that really is the key difference on the surface. But there are a few fine nuances that you need to be aware of, especially now with the new contracts that just came out. So again, this part here is pretty much the same: personal property, real property. You get the property description, located in which county, the tax ID number if you have it. It's usually on the MLS listing, or you can pull a tax bill. A legal description. There usually is a short legal description on the tax bill if you don't have a complete legal. So you don't need to pull up a deed to get the entire legal description, but it's good to get a short one. And if it's an MLS listing, that information is going to be there anyways. Together with all existing improvements and fixtures, including built-in appliances and so forth, that constitutes the real property. And then personal property, you would list here if there are any personal property included or excluded from the contract. Now, purchase price and closing, initial deposit to be held in escrow, that will be a check that is provided with the offer or shortly thereafter. And there was a lot of confusion in the past with the older contracts, so it's been made clear now. So the initial deposit is either made right up front, that accompanies the offer, or it's made within X days after the effective date. In other words, the offer is made, it's accepted, then within so many days the deposit is made. The escrow agent information has to be provided. If there's an additional deposit, sometimes there's $1,000 with the offer, and then within 10 days another $10,000. It's pretty common, so that would be outlined here. Financing, if there's a loan amount, you would put it here, either 80% or $X, and then the balance to close. Very important, collected funds. There also has been a lot of confusion in the past. Can I bring a cashier's check? And collected funds are actually defined under standard S in the back of the contract. Collected funds are either checks, including cashier's checks, which are good funds but not collected funds. So they're either checks that have cleared the Federal Reserve System, or a Fed wire, or physical cash for that matter. So, but it has to be collected funds. Your buyer cannot bring a cashier's check to the closing table. They're going to have to wire the money unless they bring a cashier's check a week earlier. And each title company is going to have their own standards. But it used to be that you could buy a house, a cash purchase, $250,000, and you brought a $250,000 cashier's check to the closing. Unfortunately, that no longer works, and it's been clarified for a number of reasons. There's been a lot of fraud with cashier's checks, either just outright fraudulent counterfeit checks, but also people purchase properties and then stop payment on the cashier's check for whatever reason, they moved in and saw something, met the neighbor that they hated. Oh my God, we got to get out of this contract somehow, and they call the bank and stop payment on the cashier's check, and then the thing bounces and you have a giant mess. So for that reason, funds at closing must be collected. Closing date, this is all pretty self-explanatory, and if you're a new agent, you really want to read through the entire contract, paragraph by paragraph. Make sure you attend your initial trainings, which are now mandatory with the boards, that will also go over the contract language step by step. My goal really is to focus more on the difference between the contracts and the really big important things. Here, check if property is subject to lease or occupancy after closing. That's important. You want to make sure that that's checked, especially if this is an investment property with a tenant that's in place that's going to carry on over. Assignability. A lot of investors write a contract, where they have the buyer shown as Joe Buyer and or assigns, which is fine, but sometimes if you have working with a wholesaler or someone that's going to buy something from a private party that they may want to assign, or let's say they're buying something, they really want to put it into their IRA, or they want to put it into their into an LLC or something. It's just a lot more elegant if you just have this box checked down here where the buyer may assign the contract. So there's really no need to have the and or assigned in the buyer name on the front. You can still do it, but just to point out. Financing. Now cash here means the buyer can pay cash or get a loan. There's just no financing contingency. All of this stuff, closing cost, who pays for what, is all pretty much the same. There's one key difference, and I'm going to point it out to you in a few minutes, that has to do with some inspections. You have all of the standard disclosures here: flood zones, lead-based paint, energy brochure. This here, very important. Most buyer agents forget about that, but you're supposed to provide this brochure to the buyer. FIRPTA withholding, very important. If you have a seller that's a foreign national, in most cases 10% of the sale price have to be withheld. Now here's the big one: property inspection and right to cancel. So buyer shall have X days, blank and 15 after effective date, within which to have such inspection of property performed as buyer shall desire during the inspection period. If buyer determines in buyer's sole discretion that the property is not acceptable to buyer may terminate this contract by delivering written notice of such election to seller prior to expiration of inspection period. So with a 15-day inspection period, and you want to make sure, is it business days or calendar days, the notice of cancellation has to be delivered to the agent for the seller prior to the expiration, not the following day. If the buyer timely terminates this contract, the deposit shall be returned to the buyer thereupon. Buyer and seller shall be released of all further obligations of this contract. However, buyer shall be responsible for prompt payment for such inspections, for repair, damage to and restoration of the property resulting from such inspections, and shall provide seller with paid receipts for all work done on the property. And this buyer has the right to terminate granted herein. Buyer accepts the physical condition of the property and any violation of governmental, building, and environmental and safety codes, restrictions, or requirements, but subject to seller's continuing as is maintenance requirement, and buyer shall be responsible for any and all repairs and improvements required by buyer lender. Okay? This is an important one and a tricky one. On a traditional contract, you have additional inspection spelled out. Here, it's pretty broad. Okay. There are a couple of issues that can really become problematic in the contract, and they relate to issues that are not a recorded public record lien, and those things get discovered in a local lien search and permit search. And what I'm talking about are open permits. Code violations, where there may be a code enforcement notice pending or lien pending to be filed, some kind of code violation, maybe the lawn hasn't been cut and is overgrowing, or there's some damage to the building that hasn't been addressed, or somebody, put a roof on without a permit. Now there are 3 layers of shingles instead of the 2 that are allowed. And the buyer has to get those searches done and has to get the local lien search done to discover these things within that time frame. Because the buyer is going to accept the physical condition of the property and any violation of governmental, building, environmental, and safety codes, restrictions, or requirements. Okay? So it's during this inspection period that this has to be found and discovered, because if, let's say, God forbid, there is a violation and the search isn't done and it pops up later, the buyer owns it. Walkthrough inspection, re-inspection is pretty self-explanatory. Seller assistance in cooperation and closeout of building permits. Now, if the buyer's inspection of the property identifies open or needed building permits, and again, that will only happen if you do the inspection within that 15-day time period. And I can tell you from experience, a local lien search, depending on where, may take anywhere from 3 to 7 days. So that has to be ordered immediately. Then the seller shall promptly deliver to buyer all plans, written documentation, other information, seller's possession, knowledge, or control relating to improvements to the property, blah, blah, blah. So this means the seller is going to cooperate in good faith, but it's not the seller's responsibility to get these permits closed out, and the seller is not required to spend any money. Okay? So it's very, very important that if you find some open permits, that you write an addendum to the contract addressing, maybe extending the right to cancel the contract if these permits are not being addressed. And all of that has to happen prior to the expiration of the inspection period. Escrow agent, it's pretty straightforward. Professional advice, obviously nobody is, we're not attorneys or accountants. Default, these things are all pretty much the same here. Title examination, surveys. Now, the buyer has a little bit more time to get a survey done, up to 5 days prior to closing. Time, very important. Calendar days. So the 15 days, we're looking at 2 weeks and 1 day if that is the inspection period. Many times on, let's say, REO transactions, your inspection period will be cut down to 7 days or 10 days. So you just have to be really super on top of these things, especially the local lien searches and so forth. And you want to work with a title company that will jump on that and take care of that for you. Let's see, what else do we have here? 1031 exchange. These are all standard provisions that you're going to find in both contracts. We have a whole bunch of different riders here listed, which again pretty much mirrors the riders on the standard contract. A couple of things that are critical. Condominium rider. If there is a condominium, you got to have the condominium rider executed. You have the 3-day rider rescission until the documents are delivered. Now, if you represent the seller, you obviously want to make sure that those documents are delivered well before the inspection period expires. If you represent the buyer, you may want to take your time, because this could be an additional built-in cancellation time frame, because you can cancel. You have 3 days right of rescission once all the documents are received. Homeowners association, again, this has to be provided at the time of the contract. If not, the buyer has a right to cancel the contract until they get that information. Now, within homeowners association, only the disclosure has to be made. The seller is not obligated to provide homeowners documents and so forth. On a condominium, on the other hand, the disclosure has to be made and the documents have to be delivered from the seller to the buyer, and then the right of rescission, 3 days for resales or 14 days for new condos, starts at the time that the documents are received. Financing contingencies, short sale, interest-bearing escrow account, that's really non-existent at this point since banks aren't paying any interest. Lead-based paint, still important. Just because it is an as-is contract doesn't mean that this disclosure doesn't have to be given. If it was built after 99, you certainly want to give the drywall disclosure, since there could be Chinese drywall used. So you want to go over this here and make sure that you have all of the addendums checked off that are included in part to the contract. But that's pretty much the as-is contract here. And let's take a look by contrast at the traditional contract. Residential contract for sale and purchase. And this is the latest and greatest, revised August 2013, and there are some new things in here that are very, very critical that I want to point out to you. So in the traditional contract, again, this information here is the same: the parties, the property description, personal property, purchase price, the deposit, must be collected funds. All of this stuff here is the same. Occupancy and possession, check if property is subject to lease, assignability, financing. Again, these are virtually identical. Closing cost, same thing here. Title, who selects, designates the closing agent, and so forth. Permit disclosure, except as may have been disclosed by seller to buyer in a written disclosure. So you want to have the seller disclosure, the property disclosure statement. Seller does not know of any improvements made to the property which were made without required permits or made pursuant to permits which have not been properly closed. So again, you want to get a property disclosure statement. If it turns out later that the seller had something put in, they put in a new air conditioner, but no permits were pulled, or there was a permit opened for a roof and never closed, then obviously the seller lied about it and you would have some recourse. Now, here we go to the inspection area. And this is what's different from your as-is contract. So let's take a look at that. First of all, the inspection period and repair. Inspection period by the earlier of 15 days, which of course can be changed, or 5 days prior to closing, inspection period. So standard is 15 days, but you can obviously change that. Buyer may at buyer's expense conduct general, wood-destroying organism, and permit inspection described below. If buyer fails to timely deliver to seller a written notice or report required by B, C, or D below, then except for seller's continuing maintenance requirement, buyer shall have waived seller's obligation to repair, replace, treat, or remedy the matters not inspected and timely reported. So this means your local lien search and permit search, which go hand in hand, has to be done prior to the expiration of the inspection period. So again, you got to get on top of that. If you miss this time frame, let's say, and I see this all the time, a lien search is not ordered until just before closing, and the inspection period has long come and gone, and now you find out that there are some issues. Well, it could very well be too late at that point. So here are the different kind of inspection. You get the general inspection, those items specified in paragraph 12b below, which seller is obligated to repair or replace. General repair items, used to call it warranted items, may be inspected by a person who is licensed. If you want to have a unlicensed inspector or self-inspection, you need to have an addendum to the contract to allow that. Otherwise, you must hire a licensed person. Property condition. Following items shall be free of leaks, water damage, or structural damage. The ceiling, roof, exterior, interior walls, windows, foundation. And this has been tightened up. I remember when I first got into real estate 12 years ago, for instance, the roof didn't reference damage, it just referenced watertight. So literally, if somebody nailed a tarp onto a leaking roof and it was now watertight, then that satisfied the requirement. General property repair. Sellers only obligated to make such general repairs that are necessary to bring the items into compliance. So for instance, if there is a roof leak, they don't have to replace the entire roof, they just have to fix the leak. Wood destroying organisms. This deals with termite damage, termite inspections, and so forth. Termite inspections are very, very inexpensive, so you definitely want to have that done. Even if the house is a concrete house, most of the framing is wood, the roof, so you can have issues there. And again, here it talks about the seller's obligation to make repairs or was previously treated, to transfer the treatment warranty and so forth. Inspection and closeout of building permits, very important. In our area here, we had Hurricane Charlie. A lot of homes were damaged. Contractors were overwhelmed. A lot of permits were pulled and opened and never closed out, especially when you go to Port Charlotte, Northport, in that area. And most of these contractors are no longer in business. So you want to make sure that there are no open permits. And again, the buyer has to give notice during the inspection period. Now here again, the seller is going to agree and assist with closing out permits, and the seller is going to have to pay for it up to the repair limit. And let's take a look up here where the repair limit is fixed. Up here under closing cost, title insurance, and so forth, under other, it's kind of snuck in here, so it's not in the same area as the inspection language. It's going to talk about the repair limit, general repair items, wood destroying, yada yada yada. Now, sometimes you may have a seller that does not want to pay for any repairs, and if that's the case, you can put 0 in here or 0% into the repair limits, and then what that means is once there is an inspection done, and if repairs really are needed, then the seller can refuse to make the repairs and the buyer could cancel. But unlike a as-is contract where the buyer can cancel for any reason at all, I mean, they just don't like the color of the carpet in the closet in the second bedroom, they can cancel. Whereas here, the buyer then could only cancel if there are truly general repair items that would have to be addressed. So, the buyer may do an inspection and there's a crack in the floor tile or just, some little damage somewhere that is not a general repair item. And many times you get these inspection reports where the buyer wants to have this, and this repaired, but they're really not general repair items, and the seller is not obligated to make those repairs. And so in that case, the buyer could not cancel the contract. So if you represent the seller, obviously I would always prefer having a regular contract, and if your seller doesn't want to make unnecessary repairs, put in a $0 repair limit in the contract, which gives the buyer the right to cancel if there are termite, general repair items, and so forth, but it protects the seller in the sense that the buyer can't just cancel for whatever reason the buyer feels like. Walkthrough inspections, re-inspections, very important. The walkthrough inspection is solely to confirm that all items of personal property are on the property and to verify that seller has maintained the property as required, so it's in the same condition, they continue to cut the lawn and so forth, and that they made repairs and replacements required by this contract. So this is not intended for the buyer to do another inspection and find this and this and this, and now they find something else that they don't like, or something else that should be fixed, or something else that should be painted, or what have you not. That's not what the final walkthrough is about. The final walkthrough is just to verify that everything has been done. Okay, and then repair standards, yada yada yada. All repairs shall be completed in good workmanlike manner by an appropriately licensed person. Something to consider as a buyer agent: you want to get copies of the repair receipts from the seller. And unless it's something really minor, you don't want the seller to fix electrical things themselves if there's something found. We don't want the seller to fix the roof themselves if there's a problem with the roof. Even if the seller has the talent to do it. No, you want to have a licensed roofing contractor that does it properly. If there's a requirement to pull a permit to do the roofing work, then you want to make sure that a permit is pulled. So the seller is obligated to do things properly. And then escrow agent, and the rest of it is virtually the same as on the other contract. Time, again, calendar days. It used to be, and there's still some boards that have their own contract versions that they use, that there are business days used as days instead of calendar days. For example, I remember when I first started, the as-is contract had business days and the traditional contract had calendar days. So you want to make sure that you are aware X days means business days or calendar days, and when will that actually, that due date be on the calendar. And when we get to the very end of it here, we have our list of addendums again. And one thing that you're going to find here is as is and right to inspect and cancel. So there are additional addendums that you can attach to the standard sale and purchase contract that would give you the net result of having an as-is contract or having the ability to have right inspect and cancel. So you could take the normal contract and convert it in essence into an as-is contract or what have you not. Usually I see this being used in more of a counter scenario where, okay, if we're going to do this, then we have to have the right to walk or whatever, and then that addendum is added to the mix. Let's take a look at these riders here. And again, these are riders that you would not use on a as-is contract, obviously. But as is, seller's obligation with respect to the property limitations. So basically, the paragraphs 9 through 11 through 12 are deleted. Inspection period, buyer shall have X days to inspect. If buyer determines in buyer's sole discretion that the property is not acceptable to buyer, buyer may terminate the contract. And if buyer elects to proceed with the contract or fails to timely terminate, then the buyer is going to continue with the property as is. So that would be the as is addendum to the contract. And then we have the right to inspect and cancel. In lieu of inspection period set forth, buyer shall have so many days to inspect as the buyer shall desire. So the buyer does not have to use a licensed individual in this case. Talks about buyer having to make repairs to any damages if they don't close. Buyer determines buyer's sole discretion of the property is not acceptable, buyer may terminate. And the key difference here is that the seller is still obligated to make repairs. So with the right to inspect and right to cancel addendum, basically the parties are saying, okay, the buyer has so many days to do the inspection, and they can decide if they want to move forward with the contract or not. If they do move forward with the contract, then the seller does have to make repairs as agreed to under the repair limit with destroying organism repair limit and so forth, as opposed to the as-is contract where it says, okay, the buyer has so many days to do the inspection, and once the inspection is done, the buyer can basically decide to either cancel the contract or accept the property as is. So the seller isn't obligated to make any kind of repairs or improvement whatsoever. So I know this can get quite confusing, and if you are one of our agents on our Google Drive, you have here in this folder RPM forms and docs, the contract docs. These are all of the documents that are most often used, like the lead-based paint brochure, the warning, stuff that you're going to be using more often than not. And if you are working with any other company, just go into Planet Realtor, into the Form Simplicity library of forms, and they're all there. But I suggest you print out the contracts and really go through them line by line. And if you have any questions, I would highlight them, and I would go and talk to your broker if you have a question about it, or go and talk to your board during the training. And again, you want to make sure that you take advantage of the training opportunities that are afforded to you. In our area here, we have two excellent boards, associations. We have the Sarasota Association of Realtors as well as the Manatee Association of Realtors, and they all have training classes that are designed to really walk you through these documents and through these contracts. In closing, personally, I would say if I was an investor or I was to represent an investor that is going to make a purchase, I would use an as-is contract with the simple reason that I have a lot of latitude to walk away from the deal and cancel it if anything I find doing the inspections is not to my liking, the carpeting, the flooring, something, anything. So investors really like to use these contracts because it allows them to do their quote-unquote due diligence and then walk for any reasons if they do not like what they want. If you're dealing with a traditional buyer, I would always go with the traditional contract, because there you're obligating the seller to make repairs to the general repair items, or formerly known as warranted items, which will give your buyer a lot more certainty that they're going to buy something that is not going to be having major defects when they move in. Also, as a seller, I would prefer to see a traditional contract as opposed to an as-is contract, unless I'm selling something to another investor, because there too I have more certainty that the buyer is going to stay with the property. If you're the seller and the buyer, let's say they do the inspection, find a ton of things that are wrong, and that are truly general repair items that are wrong. I mean, you as a seller now have knowledge that that these items exist, and you're going to have to repair them anyhow, and so you might as well get them taken care of. If you're a seller and a buyer is making an offer for an as-is contract, and then they do the inspection, they give you notice, we found this, and this. Now you are aware of these items as a seller. You know that there's a structural defect over here. You know that there's a roof leak. You know that there's a problem with the air conditioner. And these are all things that are quote-unquote hidden defects that have to be disclosed to any future buyer. So you really can't get around it. So just some food for thought, and I hope you enjoyed this short training session. Well, it's actually a long training session, but it's a very, very important subject. And please give me your feedback, post your comments, let me know what other issues you would like to have training on, or if there are any questions that you have. As always, thank you so much, and I look forward to our next session. Thomas Hyman here, broker for Realty Partners, and some of you might know me as Mr. Short Sales.